Hello everybody, today I'm excited to talk to you about what is potentially one of the dumbest and weirdest experiments I've ever read about, the Raft. Now I want to preface and say that the ideas behind this experiment were a bit more mature, or at least that's how it was supposed to go, so viewer discretion advised. And several of you who just clicked on this video may be curious as to what the Raft experiment was, so here's a brief overview. A researcher interested in studying human reaction within an enclosed space put himself and 10 other people on a raft for 101 days as they went across the Atlantic. The people in the experiment weren't really privy to what the whole point of it was. The researcher just kept telling them he's trying to invent world peace. However, what it turns out the researcher was actually studying was the connection between violence and intermingling. He was convinced that any group of people that were composed of both men and women, after a certain amount of time alone, would either result to complete violence or complete the opposite of violence. For this reason, the experiment was famously known in the news as the sex raft. So how did that experiment go? Well, we're gonna talk about it. Well, we'll talk about that right after I talk about this. And you may be wondering, what's this? Well, if you'll turn your face about 5 degrees in that direction. Before we get into all of that, I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Manscaped. I'm thankful for Manscaped, not only because they give me money and free stuff to talk about their things on my stupid little internet channel, but also because they are the solution for what is an otherwise horrifying process. And thanks to the new Performance Package 4.0, taking care of yourself has never been more easy. This kit is a one-stop shop for everything that you need in order to stay and smell fresh. For one, within the kit you'll get the Lawnmower 4.0, which is the handy-dandy full-body razor that includes a little LED light for all of your shaving needs. And then after you get done using the lawnmower, you can use the Crop Preserver, which is a quick-drying, long-lasting moisturizer. And I've got to balance this microphone again, one second. Which all you have to do is pump a little bit out, rub it in for an all-day moisturized feel. And then after that, you can use the Crop Reviver, which is an all-day long deodorant and toner, which again, all you have to do is just a couple spritz and you're good to go. And then with all of that, you get the Weed Whacker nose and ear trimmer, which I can say makes me feel confident whenever I shove hundreds of electric spinning razor blades into my face. And then with the Performance Package 4.0, you can opt into the Peak Hygiene plan, which will deliver these renewable products to your door monthly. And for a limited time, if you get the Perfect Package 4.0, you will also receive, as an added bonus, the Manscaped travel bag, which is a very nice bag that I've used from everything from camping to hotels or whatever, as well as the anti-chafe Manscaped briefs, which I am wearing right now and will not show you for, again, obvious reasons. However, I can say they are comfortable. So if you go to the link in the description today at manscaped.com and use the promo code Wendigoon, you will be able to get all of this for 20% off. So that's everything that I mentioned, the entire Perfect Package 4.0. Go to the link in the description, use discount code Wendigoon to get 20% off, as well as free international shipping. What's not to love? Thank you all so much for watching the ad. It really does mean a lot. Thank you so much to Manscaped. I really appreciate it. And again, appreciate the t-shirt. I hope you all check them out and use the link in the description. And we are back to the video. I'm excited to get into it, so let's get into it. But as always, thank you for watching. So who was this mad scientist who put this whole shindig together? Well, that was a man by the name of Santiago Genoves. Santiago immigrated to Mexico from Spain when he was only 15 years old. He did this as a means of escaping the Spanish Civil War. It's believed that from this point, Santiago developed an insane attraction to the concept of violence. And while you may think, oh, well, did that mean he became a violent person or was sort of like involved in violent rings? No, not at all. That means that from a purely book and study perspective, he thought reading about it was cool, which I guess is kind of the same boat I'm in right now. Anyway, so as he grew up, Santiago became an anthropologist with a specific study on violence throughout human culture. At one point, he began studying with another anthropologist by the name of Thor Heyerdahl, and yes, his name was Thor, I'm not kidding. And Thor was trying to prove the point that it was just as possible for Africans to get to the New World at around the same time that Columbus did. So Thor and Santiago constructed reed rafts very similar to the technology available at the time that Christopher Columbus would have been around, and floated across the Atlantic Ocean. It was during this voyage that Santiago began to conspire in his head and figure out that being trapped alone at the ocean was a really good time for people to get angry and let their primal emotions out. What that means between him and Thor, if it got brutally violent or if he thought about getting brutally violent, I don't know, but that's the conclusion he came to. Not only that, but about a year later, Santiago was involved in the Southern Airways Flight 49 hijacking in 1972. Short version, there was a plane that was taking off that was attacked by a group of hijackers, and then it didn't really go anywhere, no one was killed. However, being one of the hostages on the plane absolutely thrilled him. Like, he was so stoked because I think he was on his way back from a conference he had just gave about violence in history, and then he was taken as a hostage, and this just made him all giddy inside. And something I want to get out of the way now is not a lot of people dunk on Santiago for being kind of stupid. I mean, everyone who like reads about the case kind of gets that idea, and stupid may not be the right word. It's just, whenever I read about like the stuff this guy wrote, he is so incredibly pretentious to the point it doesn't really feel like he has an experience with what he's talking about. And what I mean by that, and as we're going to find out here in a second, it's like everything that he spent all his time researching and studying, he didn't really think about it in terms of practical human emotions. Like, for example, the basis for this entire Raft experiment was a similar experiment was conducted on monkeys. So like, he sets up the experiment the exact same way it was done with the monkeys, and when humans don't react the exact way, he gets like angry about it. And I think it's almost like a cautionary tale of how if you can get hyper focused on a topic or things that people do and don't really think about like, you know, how people interact, or just like understand a lot of, you know, social dynamics don't apply directly from monkeys to humans. And like, you'll see what I'm talking about here in a second, but I'm going to take every opportunity I can to talk about how weird this dude was. So anyways, him getting really hyped up of being part of a violent hostage situation, or an almost violent hostage situation, and floating across the Atlantic gave him the idea for the Raft experiment. So what was this Raft experiment? Well, Santiago had constructed a 12 meter by 7 meter raft. For us Americans, it's like 40 by 23 feet. It's okay, I didn't know either. And he had put ads in papers across the world asking for volunteers to come and be a part of one of the great scientific experiments of the century. It was said that 6 women and 4 men would be chosen for the experiment. I'll get into the details of why those numbers later. And then beginning in the Canary Islands in Africa and ending in Cozumel, Mexico, that may be pronounced wrong, it was like from here to here, over the course of 101 days. Now, he never told them, even during the experiment, what the purpose of the experiment was, because he wanted the reaction to be purely natural. And the only thing that he said is that this experiment was going towards developing the idea of world peace. Surprisingly, or at least surprisingly to me, hundreds and hundreds of people volunteered and wanted to be a part of it, so Santiago pretty much had his pick of who he wanted. So what was the actual experiment about that no one knew at the time, but we know now? And also, let me preface, a lot of this was unknown, and like the details of what happened on it were unknown up until a couple years ago. A documentary was made, which is a great documentary, by the way, where they brought the still living members who were on the raft and interviewed them about what it was, and then they read through Santiago's old logs to put a whole picture together. So most of the opinions and stuff I describe are from that. In experiments conducted with monkeys, it had been shown that whenever you throw a bunch of male and female monkeys into a cage and just like leave them there for a while, eventually the males will begin violently fighting each other and begin rapidly mingling with the females. So Santiago was super convinced that humans would do the exact same thing. So his entire purpose with this experiment was to throw 6 women and 4 men into a boat, and his plan or idea was that they would get incredibly violent and begin copious offspring creation. And like in his logs he wrote about it, that we're not just talking like, oh, like there's a couple cute romances like summer camp that develop and a couple of the guys get into fist fights. No, he was like, they're gonna kill each other and everyone's going to be pregnant by the time we get to Mexico, like just like full blown, cats and dogs and trouble and chaos in the streets and whatever else. And you may be thinking, wow, Wendigoon, that's like super disrespectful of you to talk about this experiment that resulted in so much chaos and murder. Hold your thought on that. Obviously, because of this, he never told the press either of what the intent of the experiment was. Although midway through the trip, as we'll see, they kind of got the idea. So anyway, who were these 10 people that Santiago ended up choosing? Well, just going through them in no particular order, there was Faye from the United States. She was married with kids and always had an interest in science, so that's what got her encouraged to be a part of this. There was Servana from France. She also had children and was married, and one of the reasons that she wanted to be a part of it is because she's a professional diver. There was Maria from Sweden, who was a naval captain, and although she didn't have a family, she was still chosen because there wasn't an overabundance of female naval captains who wanted to be a part of the experiment. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure she was the only one, because as I'm going to explain in a second, there was a purpose to all these women having family and children. There's also Mary from the USA, who was a waitress and pretty much signed up just because she thought that it could be interesting, or at least that's the initial reason she signed up. We'll get more into the psychology of why she did in a bit. There was Edna from Israel, who was a former soldier and now doctor, who pretty much signed up because she wanted to prove to herself that she could do it. There was Rashida, I believe that's how it's pronounced, from Algeria, who she was a scientist and researcher who studied pollution and wanted to be a part of another research study. And now on the guy side, there was Esoke from Japan, who was a photographer. The general vibes I got from him is that he also just signed up because he thought it sounded cool. There was Jose from Uruguay, who was an anthropologist and wanted to be a part of someone else's study. There was Bernardo, who was an Angolan priest. I'll mention why he was chosen in a second. And Charles, who was from Sicily and was a radio operator. I kind of get the general vibe that he was in it for the fame because there was a lot of media coverage around this experiment. So if you listen to like the specifics of those names I just mentioned, you may have noticed a few commonalities. For one, all 6 of the women, if you could tell, were for the most part more experienced or had more experience with this topic than the males did, and that was on purpose. Whenever they got out to sea, all of the women were given the important jobs, things like navigation, storm watching, boat management, whereas the men were given jobs like stacking the food cans and sweeping the deck and stuff like that. And this certainly wasn't in a girl boss go equality kind of way, much more in a old world showmanship kind of way. His belief was that if you put women in power and specifically gave them authority over men, it would cause such an angry, hate-filled attitude to rise up in the men that they would begin just getting violent and punching each other. Because everything that he's doing here, he's doing to try to prompt a physical reaction. Also, with the exception of a couple, all of the women were married with children. That's because in the aforementioned monkey experiment that happened, it was shown that the monkeys fought most often over women who had the ability to have children. So he literally was treating humans like they were bugs in an experiment, and he's like, oh, these are the most fertile, so we definitely want them because then the males will become more alpha and fight each other in order to get fertile women. Also, and I'm stressing again, none of them were told any of this, and anytime they asked, he told them this was to develop world peace. So these like totally clueless people were just like, all right, I'll get on a boat. I don't care. 100 days off from work sounds good to me. Santiago was so convinced that this was going to happen and everyone was just going to go full primal at each other that is the reason he asked Bernardo to come on. Because like I mentioned, Bernardo was an Angolan priest. So he thought it would add a layer of intrigue if he put a religious figure on the boat, because then he was convinced that the males would be so just chomping at the bit, ready to go, that if he put a priest on there as a way to make them think about religion, it would make them even more upset. So he was so confident this would happen that he put a roadblock in his own experiment, because he thought that would just spice it up a little bit. Also, every single one of these people to the best of Santiago's ability, had a different background and belief. If you'll remember, 2 of the women were from the United States and everyone else was from a different country. Not only that, but everyone had different religious backgrounds and political beliefs and different marriage statuses. The idea was he was trying to create a microcosm of people around the world itself. So all 10 of them meet each other and Santiago the night before they're supposed to take off. And the way it works is that they were on the African coast and they needed a tugboat to pull them out from the coast a certain distance so that way the waves can pick them up and then carry them over to Mexico. So the next morning, everyone waits for the cameras, saves goodbye to their families, they get on the boat and take off. To set the stage for how this entire trip would go, while they were being pulled out by the tugboat, Maria, the ship captain, her boyfriend was on that tugboat. And then as they're going out to sea, she gets a radio call from him where he's freaking out and everything, and he asks, did you read the contract that Santiago had you sign? Because as you can imagine, for this kind of experiment, he had everyone sign a contract. And the boyfriend, screaming over the radio, says that it says in the contract you are to give your body, mind, and soul to Santiago, and he can do with you whatever he wants. Now, while that whole statement's a little pretentious that Santiago would put that in the contract, the morality of this experiment's questionable at best anyway. So Maria kind of calms him down and says it's going to be fine and then hangs up. But imagine that. You're about to go out to ocean with this researcher and 9 other people for 101 days. And then as you are leaving the coast, someone gets on the radio and starts going, he says he's going to take your soul. He says he controls your mind. Stop. Beep. I'm sure this definitely isn't foreshadowing of things to come. So as soon as they get started on this trip, everyone is already kind of weirded out by Santiago. Before they started this voyage, he had asked them very personal questions in the preliminary question time whenever he picked out the 10. Stuff like, if you could hook up with someone, who would it be? Have you ever thought about murdering someone? And things like that. Well, every week that they were on the boat, he would hand out these questionnaires that they all answered privately and then handed back to him that got progressively more intensive. Like, for example, going down the murder one, it went from, have you ever thought about murdering someone, to who have you thought about murdering? And then what weapon would you use? How would you do it? How would you get away with it? And stuff like that to try to understand their psyche. And these were asked every week. So not only was that a little strange, like, you're just on a boat vibing with some people and then someone's like, hey, you ever thought about killing your mom? But Santiago was really like retracted from everyone else too. And I think it kind of serves as a pretty good picture of what the guy was like. Like, everyone else is around, socially interacting, and he's just sitting back over there in a journal writing about what social interaction may be like. Like, everyone's just talking or whatever, and he's sitting back there like, any moment now, they're gonna rip out each other's throat. And what's so funny that contrasts with this, and this is my favorite detail of the entire experiment, everyone on the raft besides Santiago became best friends. Like, legit, they took video footage like at periodic times throughout this entire trip as in order to catalog it, and everyone's smiling, they're hanging out, they're playing on the cells, people getting out, swimming around in the water by the raft as it's moving. And not only that, but after the experiment was over, everyone maintained contact with each other and stayed best friends for the rest of their lives. As a matter of fact, whenever they do the documentary and they bring everyone back after 50 years, they're all just like, oh, hey, haven't seen you since last meetup. How you doing? How are the kids? Like, the purpose of this experiment, and the reason I'm talking so nonchalantly about it, was because of this. Because the purpose of the experiment was to watch these people, like, just kill each other or something close to kill each other, when in actuality they just became best buds and stayed best buds, except for Santiago. So while everyone else is partying, having a good time, grilling hamburgers on the front of the boat and everything, they were all kind of creeped out by Santiago, who also, mind you, everyone on the boat was like mid-20s to mid-30s, and Santiago was 54 at the time of the experiment. So he's already like a much older guy, but there's just an old guy at the back of the boat, like hunched over a notepad writing about how he can't wait for them to kill each other. So you may be asking at this point, what was life like on this little raft, which he called the Acali, by the way. So what was life like on the Acali? Well, there was this one little covered section where everyone slept next to each other. This was done because remember, the entire design of this is everyone gets mad with each other eventually. And then there was a little sort of bench area as you come out of that, and then you walk around to the front of the raft, and that's where the sails put up. That's where the table was that they would eat with each other and stuff like that. In the pictures that I'm showing, you're going to see a lot where it looks like they're sitting inside of like an orange bowl thing. That was the roof of the little covered area. It kind of caved in so that people could sit around up there. All of the food that they ate during the 101 days was packed beforehand, so it was rationed out and people ate at certain times. And you may be asking, well, how did people do things like go to the bathroom? That's what the poop cage was for. I know, that's what they called it. It's this metal cage that had a bar that had a little hole in it. And a lot of people talked about during the first week or two, they were like, constipated because no one wants to do that in front of each other. But by the end, everyone was so close and had seen each other in every state of undress imaginable that they just didn't care. So again, aside from Santiago's whole hermit, like, keep journal on everyone habit, everyone got along and it was just kind of treated like a free cruise. Of course, there were some concerns and bad things that happened. One of them being nearly the entire time that they were at sea, there was a pod of sharks following them. Is it pod or school? The internet is telling me that a group of sharks is called a shiver. That's fantastic. Okay. They were being followed by a shiver of sharks for nearly the whole trip. And the fact that it was a sailboat meant that they kept speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, and slowing down. Early on, the control that Santiago had was made apparent because, see, the way that he staged it was like, oh, you all are going to run the boat. I'm just going to be the silent observer. But as soon as Captain Maria started to make calls about, oh, we should hoist the sails, do this, do that, whatever, he immediately tried to fight her on it. Because as we're going to find out, Santiago was also a huge control freak. This led to a general state in just the first few weeks of the trip where people were getting really angry at him. Like, they'd start making fun of him and calling him mean words and stuff like that. At least a couple would, like Maria. Maria and Santiago hated each other. And what's really funny is in the documentary, whenever Maria comes back after 50 years, she's like, yeah, I still can't stand the man. I know he's dead, but I hate him. And like, as further proof of how weird Santiago was, another thing he would do in addition to the questionnaires is every week he would make everyone draw a picture of a tree. Because there's this thing in psychology that by the way someone draws the roots and the way they draw the branches and stuff like that, you can get a picture of what their mental health is like. It's kind of like that whole thing of draw a face, and by the way they draw the face, you can tell, you get it? So he has all of them draw these trees, and like Maria, who is incredibly hateful towards him, like comes up and throws the tree in his face, and then he writes in his journal and he's like, from the detail of the branches, I can tell she is rather upset. And again, it wasn't towards other people, that no one liked Santiago. As like a really big testament of how like off he was from getting everyone else, there was this one time, they had these fishing poles on the ship, and there's this one time that one of the guys caught a shark. And the way that you hear them describe it years later and in interviews is like, oh, well, we caught a shark and then we brought it on board. And then we were like, hey, we haven't ate anything that isn't in a can for a long time. So they like, fillet it and everything. And then they cook it on the grill and everyone's like, ooh, now I've tried shark meat. Isn't that cute? Meanwhile, Santiago's journal entry for this occasion is like, I watched Jose sprint to the back and come back with an axe, and then I watched with the primality of man as he took off the head of the shark, and then everyone put their nasty hands in and pulled out pieces, when in reality they were just eating a fish. And he kept talking about how this was like the big like he kept saying in describing it, this is the break, this is the moment, this is when everything goes downhill. And he ends the journal entry for that section like, I hid the axe, just in case in the morning their bloodlust is still strong. Like, they were eating a fish! Also, from that point on, after the shark thing, he began to sort of refer to them as the mob in passing. Like after this shark event, he started to write like, the mob is gathering together and getting supply. Like he really thinks he did something there. And then as another point of how control freakish he was and like wanted everyone to do things his way, there was a point about little before midway through the journey when the rudder broke on the raft. And I mentioned again, Servane, the woman from France who I mentioned earlier, is a professional diver. So she starts putting on her diver gear to go fix it. And Santiago's like, no, we cannot risk a woman. I will be the one to go fix it. So he like puts on her diving gear, which is adjusted to her and doesn't fit him or anything. And he had this really big beard at the time, so the mask wouldn't seal right. So anytime he went underwater, it would just flood his face. So eventually he just had to hold his breath and go down there. And then he lets the group know he doesn't know how to fix a rudder. So the entire time Servane is like, I know how to fix ships. This is literally my job. Just let me do it. He keeps being like, no, I will be the one to fix it. So everyone goes to sleep that night. Servane and I believe it was Faye, I'm not sure who was lookout for. Servane gets into the water. She goes down and repairs it. Takes like 5 minutes. Comes back out and sets it all up. Goes back to bed. So whenever... Also, she did this at night, by the way. Just add another layer. So whenever everyone wakes up, Santiago's like, all right, we will now go fix the rudder. And Servane's like, hey, look, I did that while y'all were asleep. I just want to go ahead and do it. And Santiago lost his mind. Like, he started freaking out, saying that they're not taking this seriously. Like, this is a form of mutiny and everything else. And yeah, that's the kind of guy we're dealing with. Also, during this time, there was some level of romance that began to form. And I use the term romance flippantly. I think people were just kind of bored. Because another detail was they weren't allowed to have anything or bring anything that would be entertainment. Like, they couldn't bring books. They couldn't bring anything like that. I think maybe it was Jose or Charles brought a guitar because that could be seen as like a group activity. So the only form of entertainment was talking to each other and singing songs back and forth to each other and telling stories and stuff like that. So at some point, you know, a couple of the guys got kind of bored and one of the girls is kind of bored. Years later, Edna had admitted that she shared an intimate moment with Isoke and Charles on 2 separate occasions. And also, in my research, I'm pretty sure that Charles was engaged at the time of this, so that one I don't approve of. But something that seemed kind of clear in research was this was not like, oh, she was in love with either of them or anything like that. It's just, you put a bunch of people with nothing to do for a while, they're going to keep themselves preoccupied. And what's funny is Edna said whenever she was doing that, she would have a couple of her friends, I believe it was Faye and Mary, literally like guard the back of the boat so that no one could come around to the back or whatever and see them doing it. And what's even more hilarious, I don't think Santiago ever found out about this because from all my readings, he never talked about it in his notes. And remember, that was one of his primary purposes of the entire experiment, to see if that kind of thing would happen. So I think that they just straight up didn't tell him. But what you've also got to remember is he never told them what the purpose of this experiment was. So they may be like, hey, we're bored. We don't want him to know about all this for several reasons. So we could just like go over here privately and not let anyone know. However, considering how they all felt about him, I'm pretty sure if they knew that was what he wanted to find out about, that they still wouldn't tell him just because he was so annoying. And I want to emphasize, I don't think this is him proving his point at all. Because remember, his point's like, oh, they're going to be feral, they're going to tear everyone apart, and it's going to be this disgusting monster fest or whatever. And this was literally just like a couple young single people being like, hey, I'm bored, you wanna... Because Edna and Isoke both made it clear in subsequent interviews that that's just kind of what they did aside from the raft. Like, they got bored and did that as a pastime. So it's not like the raft changed their psychology. They were just the same people. And also, I feel like, as a scientist, Santiago should know that the chances of romance are incredibly decreased in an experiment whenever every time 2 people may be developing some form of a bond, there's a 50-year-old man at the back of the boat, like, may hurt your chances of developing a relationship. So, about halfway through the trip, Santiago got mad because he just figured that, like, why aren't they killing each other or doing other things yet? This isn't what I wanted. So he starts just, like, being a jerk, and he considers that introducing like chaos to the theory. Like he's stirring the pot now, but really he's just being mean. Like for example, he gathered everyone together and he started reading their questionnaires out loud. Because remember, these have been like very private answers, and several of the questions were like, if you could hook up with one other person on the raft, who would it be? If you could kill one other person on the raft, who would it be? So he gets everyone together and he starts reading their questions. And one of them was like, Edna had said that if she could hook up with anyone, it would be Jose. But Jose had said that if he could kill anyone, it would be Edna. So he points that out as like, ha ha, she said that she has a crush on you, but you said that you don't like her. Like, it's the most middle school stupid scenario you could imagine. And what's really funny is everyone was so like friendly with each other that no one cared. Like whenever that came out, Jose was like, I'm sorry. Whenever I answered that, I didn't really know you that well, and it was a different time. And Edna's like, oh, it's okay, sweetie. I totally get it. I think you're cute. And he kept doing that. He kept being like, Faye, you said that you hated Charles. And Faye was like, well, I said that because that day he stole some of my food, blah, blah, blah. And Charles is like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, it's just like he keeps trying to get them to fight each other, but everyone was so nice and so friendly towards each other, it kept not working. And then around this point, like, he got really violent and like really inappropriate. It started out with him doing things like splashing water on people's faces randomly, and then being like, are you ready to fight? Like, does this make you upset? And then he just like started straight up being racist. Like, for example, he went to Faye, who, as you can see from the pictures, is black, and began just calling her words like primitive, a thief, and other incredibly rude, like racist terms. And he would even walk up to Faye and be like, are you going to sleep with Bernardo anytime soon? Because at this point, he just didn't care if they knew what the experiment was about. And he'd be like, because you're both, why don't you, And like, he did the same to like Charles and Servane, because he's like, you're both European, in nature, like when animals look alike, and it's so dumb. And what makes it even more annoying is the entire time this was happening, he kept writing in his book about like how they just don't get it. Or in other words, he was saying stuff like, I am on the precipice of one of the greatest experiments of mankind, and all they care about is friendship and getting along and survival, like idiots. And he also just tried to keep like micromanaging every aspect of their life. Like, say there's 2 identical food cans, and like 2 people pick them up, you'd be like, that one's for Jose, and Bernardo gets that one. And like, just like petty stuff like that, just to maintain a sense of control. And he'd even start just straight up lying about gossip to each other. Like, he'd go over to Ahsoka and be like, I heard Charles said that you were his least favorite, but I heard Faye says she has a crush on you, and just stupid stuff like that. Also, there was this beautiful moment in the documentary that I want to emphasize to show kind of like the disillusionment that was happening between Santiago and everyone else. There's this moment in the documentary where Faye and Mary, if you'll remember, they're the 2 people, both from the United States, are having a conversation with each other. And Faye says that as they were going across the Atlantic, it was one evening, it was kind of quiet, she had the realization that she is going along the exact same path that her ancestors would have gone through whenever the slave trade was happening. Or in other words, she is traveling the same path as those before her did in bondage, only now she was doing it as part of a scientific research experiment as a free person. And she said in that moment, across the ocean as the sun was setting, it hit her all at once, the realization of people have died before me so that I can be where I'm at. And now they live on through me. And how she said that one moment on the boat managed to change her entire life view and made her more appreciative of things to come. Not only that, Mary said, because originally I said at the beginning that Mary joined just because she thought it would be interesting to see if she can do it. The actual reason that she had done it was because she was recently just got out of an abusive marriage. She had just divorced her husband. And she said initially there was this fear because Santiago acted the exact way that her previously abusive husband did. So whenever she was on the boat and she saw people like Faye and Captain Maria and all these people standing up against him, it gave her this courage that she could do it. And she said from her journey on this boat, she became a stronger person because of it. So like these two women are sharing such a beautiful moment with each other. And while that's going on, I want you to think about the man at the back of a boat going, any moment now, they'll kill each other. And then things got worse than that. So a few weeks before they're about to hit shore and the whole experiment's going to be over, Santiago begins to get news that the University of Cambridge, the one that he is from, who originally sponsored the study, has denounced it. The reason that they've denounced it is because the news started doing the math of, he wouldn't tell us what the experiment was. He wanted a near equal number of men and women and didn't tell him it's the sex raft. It's the sex raft now. Like all the newspapers, all the headlines, the sex raft story. And they talked about how there was these deplorable things happening on it and how he's trying to dehumanize the men and women alike. And while that's what he did want to happen, that's not at all what actually happened. It pretty much turned into a summer camp. So the combination of him getting made fun of and his university denouncing him before they ever got to shore made him even more violent. This culminated as they were coming into the area near the Caribbean, Tropical Storm Brenda began to blow through the area, and Captain Maria says it's not safe for them to sail anymore. They have to land and end the experiment early. And Santiago, still thinking that something's going to happen in these last couple weeks, says no, that will taint the experiment. So Maria says, I'm not going to be captain and like sail these people into their death. So she gets into like a physical altercation with Santiago where he's like, he literally does the whole I'm the captain now thing, and then like sends them through the storm and they just go inside and wait for it to quit raining. Which luckily no one got hurt and nothing bad happened, but something really bad could have happened. It was at this point, after Santiago had essentially committed a mutiny over the people on the ship, that everyone individually came to the conclusion that they should kill him. And like they planned this thing out too. The primary theories that were going around was people were saying Ahsoka, if you'll remember he's a photographer, could like get his camera up and be like, no, move a little more to the right, a little more to the right, and then they push him off, and then whenever they get to land they could be like, oh, there was a storm. And Faye had this idea that, which I mean, she was probably done putting up with his BS at this point, but she had the idea that they could take the drugs out of the medical bag in the back, and that while he's sleeping, they could all take turns plunging a little bit of it into him. Like a full-blown Senate murder of Caesar, like everyone stabs so that everyone's guilty thing. Like, the other people are like, we can make some plausible deniability if he like falls off the boat. And Faye's like, we could all stab him and drug him at the same time. Because it went from like, he was kind of weird and creepy, to he got to be like angry and authoritarian. And then he just started like being racist and crude and throwing water at people. And like, at this point, he stole the bows like, we're going through the storm. Like, I could also understand killing somebody. And you may be thinking, similar to Edna hooking up with a couple of guys, well, doesn't this prove his theory? Because he said that everyone was going to either intermingle or get violent, and now they've done both. And no, like if I was to walk up to you and I was to go, hey, do you want to kill me? And you're like, no, that's a weird question. And then I punch you, throw you in the back of a car, start going 150 down the freeway, like swerving through traffic, and then I look in the back seat and I'm like, now do you want to kill me? Like, that doesn't count. It's almost like one of those dumb YouTube pranks in a way, because it has the same energy of walking up to someone's like, have you ever thought about committing an act of violence? And they're like, no. And then you punch them in the face and pull a gun, and it's like, oh, are you violent now? Oh, look at this social experiment. Looks like you have potential to be violent. I'm a genius. Similar to like the couple of people hooking up earlier, this isn't some huge breakdown of the human psyche. This is just people being human. Because at this point, if they had killed Santiago, I think they could have argued it was in self-defense. So this went on for a couple days, like this weird tension of everyone quietly conspiring his murder, until one morning they wake up and someone, I think it was Bernardo, screams, there's a ship coming, and everyone runs outside. and there is a freighter coming directly at them. And if you don't know freighters, I mean, here's one. They're huge. As soon as this happens, Santiago lost his mind. He starts crying and screaming and running back and forth on deck, just like going, oh no, he just has no idea what to do. So everyone else who has this sense of unity with each other immediately like gets to order. Maria pretty much takes over as captain again and is like, Charles, get on the radio. No, actually Faye got on the radio and began signaling the message because she recreates it in the documentary. And then Mary goes up to the roof with the flare, starts singing it back and forth. Someone changes the ship mast. Like, they're doing all this stuff to signal the ship. And then sure enough, it works, and the ship diverts its course. And from that moment on, Maria stayed captain again. And from that moment on, for the rest of the trip, Santiago went into this super depressive mood. I think it's because the combination of his university shunning him and his experiment not working out, and now the fact that he couldn't maintain control, or whenever like the rubber met the road, he just freaked out. So he got really quiet, and then he got really sick, saying like his stomach hurt and he had bad blood pressure and all this. So Edna, who I mentioned earlier was a doctor and also the sort of medic on the boat, goes to him and starts attending to him every day and like feeding him and sets up a IV and stuff like that. And what's really funny is in the documentary years later, she's like, I think he was faking it. Like, he was upset that now they weren't giving him any attention, so he just pretends to be sick, so now they have to give him attention. And what's even funnier, to go against his theories, after this freighter incident, and now that they're close enough to land that there's things like freighters and birds everywhere, everyone became super linked. Like, everyone started sharing all their deep stories. There were several of them who said after this event, like, they had dealt with past trauma by talking it out, and each other kind of worked as a support system. As mentioned, they became friends for the rest of their life. And all the footage of like the last 2 weeks of the trip is them like swinging back and forth on the sails and like partying with each other and singing songs and everything, again while Santiago's pretending to be sick. And it was just like solid vibes for the rest of the trip. However, Santiago's journal entries during this time were absolutely absurd. Like, for one, he developed this really like stupid, just pouty personality. Like, he was talking about how like the experiment's been ruined because everyone else is idiots except for me, and they don't know anything they're doing, and now I'm gonna have to do this whole experiment over again. So his theory for the next experiment was to design a raft that only one person could fit in, and it's flat, so you have to lay down in it. And his idea was he would be the only one on the raft, and it would be a glass bottom raft, so that he would lay down flat and just stare into the abyss of the ocean. And he wanted to float across the entire Atlantic doing that. And like, his entire attitude towards this is like, everyone's an idiot except for me. So now I'm gonna have to do the whole thing myself. Which, if you'll like notice, the point of this experiment is supposed to be human interaction with each other. So one person alone on a raft wouldn't do any of that. It just kind of fulfills his messiah complex he has. Like, he doesn't even know what the experiment's about anymore. He just wants to feel special. So sure enough, by the time August comes, they make landfall in Mexico, and after 101 days, the raft experiment was over. They had become so close at this point that they talked about how sad they were that they wouldn't get to see their friends for a while. And like, there was someone who said, I could have stuck on that cruise forever, but I had to go home and see my kids and do all of that. But I hope in the future I get to see these people again. After they hit shore, they had like a final debriefing where the original plan was Santiago was going to tell them about all that he had discovered from their experiment, and then like let them back out into society. But what it actually was, because of the way things went, is Santiago sitting around like, well, did anyone learn anything this week? Why am I pretending to hold the microphone again? I got one. I hate that I do that. Anyway, he's like, oh, you all had a good time? That's cool. I'm sick, you know. I'm still sick. I guess this experiment's nothing. Well, I'll be sure to reference you all when I do it for real next time. So thanks for wasting everyone's day. Like, he just came off as a disappointed parent. It was hilarious. And there's even this part Because like you can hear the logs of the final one where he says that in the questionnaires that he had collected, I think he quit collecting them near the end, but in the questionnaires, the universal thing that everyone said whenever asked, like, is there anyone on the ship you hate? Is there anyone who's rude or blah, blah, blah? And they all said him. Obviously, they're like, I hate you so much. I want you. I've literally conspired to murder you. And in his final address, he goes, I was never rude, impolite, or crude to anyone. But I'm sorry you felt that way. Like, anyway, what a loser. In an interview he did a while afterwards, I believe it was on a Mexican talk show, they asked and said, besides like your data, because his data from it was like, he still tried to make the point that they all formed a mob and became violent with stuff like the shark and things like that. And not a lot of the truth of the experiment came out until recent years in the documentary and all of that. For a while, it was kind of viewed as like, ooh, these people got a little bit angry. They were out there a little longer because of his research with it. And he'd go on talk shows, and they'd be like, what did you learn besides the research? And he was like, I would say that above all else, I feel enriched. And I feel soulfully better. And it's like, dude, you were the biggest jerk. And everyone else said that they continued life as if nothing happened. I believe it was Cervane who said that whenever she left her job to start the whole journey, her boss said, well, when you get back, you know, that's going to be a whole life-changing experience being at sea for 100 days. So when you get back, you'll probably want a bigger or better job or whatever. And she said she got back and literally nothing changed. And that was kind of the consensus from everyone. Like, they made friends and they worked out personal stuff, but it wasn't like they came back thinking themselves to be like more of a animal than man or whatever else. They're just like, yeah, I had a good little vacation, made some new friends, you know how it goes. And that was the end of the Raft experiment. And one of the reasons I want to talk about it is, for one, no one's talked about it. I haven't seen like any videos or stuff covering the topic, and I think it's too funny and too weird not to. And also, like I said, up until recent years, people have cited that experiment as being proof of people going insane if left alone for long amounts of time. Which isn't at all what happened. That's just what Santiago really wanted to happen, and it didn't. But through the opinions and testimonies of those who are still alive and the stories that they tell, it's so wild that someone who has been so highly regarded, or at least, well, he probably wasn't that highly regarded. I'm not part of the scientific community, so I don't know how highly his name was praised. I can't imagine that much if Cambridge denounced him during the study. But it's weird that something that's officially logged as an exploration of the human psyche was just a big joke that a bunch of people made like summer camp connections off of. So the moral of the story and what you can take away from this is there's no time to touch grass if you spend all your time drifting at sea. And the even more important moral to remember from this story is how I feel, and I feel very thankful that you have stuck around this far, so thank you for watching. I love weird, like, scientific experiments like this, and a lot of them are much more depressing and show, like, these deeper, like, explorations of human or animal psyche. There's this one experiment that I thought about covering. It's the Rat Utopia experiment. I believe that's what it's called. However, down the rabbit hole, which his name is Frederick Knudsen. I believe that's his name on YouTube. You can look up Down the Rabbit Hole and you'll find him. He did, actually, you know what? I'll link it in the description because it's such a good vid. He did a fantastic video on that experiment, and I've wanted to cover that one, but honestly, he did so good, there's no purpose for me to. But, like, there are a ton of experiments like that explore the depravity or like the bad parts of psyche or social interaction or whatever. And while researching these, I came across this. And I believe it was some list like the 5 experiments to prove humans are evil or whatever. And it was made a few years ago, right? Before like the documentary, before people started talking about all this. And it's like the Raft experiment, and it's like it proved like they formed a mob, they got violent, although this has been like, there's a final sentence, it's like, although this has been contested as of recently. So I kind of forgot that last sentence and was like, oh, the Raft, that seems like a cool depraved experiment, let me look into that. So I do the research for it and find all the stuff I just talked about. I'm like, this is absurd. that, for one, how weird the experiment was planned to be, how much it did not turn out the way the researcher wanted it to, and like his pouty attitude. Like, I encourage anyone who thinks I'm being too harsh on the guy, Santiago or whatever, I encourage you to like read his writings, look at, not his book, Acali, because in the book Acali about this, he pretty much just talks about how people become a mob mentality or whatever. Like, that's his view of what happened. Like, compare what he said to what everyone else said and all that, and tell me that I'm being too harsh, because I really don't think I am. I think this guy was a jerk. And a problem that happens with a lot of these guys is people will have degrees, or they'll have letters in front or behind their name or whatever, and people just assume that means they know what they're talking about. However, a value of knowledge is not a value of intelligence. And with people like this, I think that can kind of be seen, or at least social intelligence. And if he just like didn't understand social cues, that would be one thing. But that doesn't excuse the racism and the meanness and the sexism and everything else that he injected into this. So yeah, I just rambled a ton about a talk. If you're watching this long, you also think it's interesting. I don't know why I'm trying to convince you it's interesting, but I just love stuff like this, and I hope to cover more of it in the future. So again, if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. As far as, I think we're at 617,000 subs, which is not a real number. None of these are real. I say that in every video, but none of these are real numbers, and I'm going to wake up one day and this can't be real. It's kind of just, I'm numb at this point because it's such an absurd explosion, and I just love it so much. And thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for sticking through the video as long as you have. Thank you so much to my patrons over here. You guys are fantastic. Your continued support and allowing me to be where I am means the most. And like things like me going full time now, which is so cool, and I can't believe it, is thanks to you all. So thank you all so much for that. So thank you to my patrons. Thank you to everyone else. It is, I've been saving this, but when this video goes up, it's going to be spooky month tomorrow. I'm so excited. I can't wait to do just creepy stuff for all of October, and I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully you are too. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.